In the quiet town of Springvale, Michigan, a miracle unfolded on a frigid January morning when a German shepherd named Rocky dived into the freezing waters of Cedar Creek to rescue 8-month-old Sophia Taylor from a sinking car. Fighting against the powerful current, the dog managed to pull the infant to safety and carry her through a blizzard to the doorstep of Thomas Parker, a retired firefighter who had lost his wife just months earlier. The security footage of Rocky collapsing after gently placing the child on the welcome mat would later be viewed by millions worldwide. What began as an extraordinary rescue soon unveiled a web of corruption within Springvale's government, brought justice to families torn apart by tragedy, and formed an unbreakable bond between a lonely widower, a struggling single mother, and a remarkable dog with mysterious past. As the story unfolds, the community discovers that Rocky's heroic act was just the beginning of a journey that would transform their lives forever, proving that sometimes the greatest heroes have 4 paws and a heart braver than any human. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Wind howled across Cedar Creek, bending trees nearly double and turning snowflakes into stinging projectiles. Springvale hadn't seen a storm this fierce in decades. Weather forecaster Derek Johnson's voice crackled through an old radio inside Thomas Parker's cabin. Repeat, this is an emergency broadcast. Flash flood warnings are in effect for Cedar Creek and surrounding areas. All residents in low-lying areas should evacuate immediately. I repeat. Thomas switched off the radio with a sigh. At 65, he'd seen enough Michigan winters to know when to worry. This one warranted worry. He pulled his wool cardigan tighter and shuffled to the window, watching ice pellets ricochet off the glass. What do you think, Sarah? He asked the empty room, a habit he hadn't broken in the 8 months since cancer took his wife. Might be time to move those firewood stacks higher. Outside, the creek that normally babbled peacefully behind his cabin had transformed into a roaring, angry beast. Swollen with snow melt and rain, the water had already breached its banks, inching ever closer to his back porch. Thomas pulled on his boots and heavy coat as he stepped onto the porch. The wind nearly knocked him sideways. Squinting against the onslaught, he noticed something in the distance. Headlights moving too fast on the Riverside Road. Damn fool, he muttered. Roads probably half washed out already. The headlights swerved suddenly, accompanied by the distant sound of tires skidding on ice. Thomas watched in horror as the vehicle slid sideways, crashed through the guardrail, and plunged down the embankment toward the swollen creek. Without thinking, Thomas was running. His old firefighter instincts kick in. Heart hammering in his chest, he slipped and slid down the path toward the river. The car's small blue sedan had landed nose first in the rising water. Already the current was pushing against it, threatening to drag it deeper. Hello, Thomas, shouted, his voice swallowed by the storm. Anyone in there? 20 yards from the embankment, Thomas's foot caught on a hidden route. He tumbled forward, landing hard on his side, pain shooting through his hip. Gritting his teeth, he tried to stand but collapsed. Again, damn it, he growled, frustration burning in his chest. The retired firefighter in him knew exactly what to do, but his aging body betrayed him as he struggled to rise. Movement caught his eye. A large dog, a German shepherd, stood at the edge of the water, staring intently at the sinking car. The dog's fur was matted and dirty, suggesting it was a stray, but something in its posture seemed purposeful. Alert, hey, Thomas called out, but the dog ignored him. Before Thomas could call again, the animal plunged into the freezing water, swimming powerfully against the current toward the vehicle. Thomas watched in disbelief as the dog disappeared around the far side of the car, where the water hadn't yet reached the windows. Moments later, the dog reappeared, something clutched gently in its mouth. Even from a distance, Thomas recognized the pale blue of a baby's blanket and something moving inside it. My God, Thomas, whispered the German shepherd. Fought the current with everything it had, powerful legs churning the water, muzzle held high to keep its precious cargo safe. When it finally reached the shore, the dog didn't stop to rest, but began climbing the embankment, heading in Thomas's direction. Thomas managed to stand leaning heavily on a nearby tree. Here, boy, he called, but his voice was lost in the howling wind. Still, the dog seemed to know exactly where it was going. It struggled up the slope toward Thomas's cabin, occasionally looking back, as if to check that Thomas was following. By the time Thomas limped back to his porch, the German shepherd was waiting, trembling from cold and exertion, the bundle still held carefully in its mouth. As Thomas approached, the dog gently laid the blanket on the welcome mat and collapsed beside it with shaking hands. Thomas unwrapped the soaked blanket. Inside was an infant, skin pale blue from cold, but miraculously still breathing, a little girl no more than 8 months old. You're okay, little one, Thomas whispered, cradling the baby close as he fumbled for his door handle. You're okay now, once inside, Thomas's training took over. He laid the baby on the couch, wrapped her in dry blankets, and checked her airways. Her breathing was shallow, but stable, no obvious injuries. He cranked up the heat and called emergency services, though the dispatcher warned it might take rescue crews time to reach him due to the worsening storm. As Thomas spoke on the phone, the German Shepherd had dragged itself inside, leaving puddles of river water on the hardwood floor. The dog's sides heaved with exhaustion, but its eyes never left the baby. Yes, an infant female, approximately 6 to 8 months, Thomas explained to dispatcher, hypothermia, but conscious and breathing. No, I don't know her name or where her parents are. She was in a car that went into Cedar Creek. No, I didn't get her out, the dog did. After hanging up, Thomas knelt beside the German Shepherd, examining it for injuries. Despite its heroic efforts, the dog seemed wary of Thomas's touch, flinching slightly when he reached out. Easy, boy, you did good, Thomas murmured. You did real good. The dog's collar was missing, leaving no clue to its identity or owner. Its ribs showed through a wet coat, suggesting it hadn't eaten well for some time. Looks like you had a rough go of it lately, Thomas said softly. But you saved this little one's life. That makes you a hero in my book. As Thomas turned his attention back to baby, trying to warm her tiny hands between his palms, the German Shepherd dragged itself closer, resting its head on the edge of the couch near the infant's feet. You keeping watch, Thomas asked. The dog's eyes met his intelligent, and somehow, knowing hours passed before the wail of sirens finally cut through the storm. Paramedics Lisa Johnson and Mike Turner battled their way through the snow to Thomas's door, medical bags in hand. Mr. Parker, Lisa called as she entered dispatch, said, oh, her eyes widened at the scene before Thomas dozing in his armchair, the baby sleeping peacefully on his chest, and the German Shepherd standing at attention beside them, still dripping river water. Is that Mike began the baby from the creek. Thomas confirmed care. Why transfer an infant to Lisa's arms? His dog pulled her out, swam right up to the car, and got her. Never seen anything like it. While Lisa examined the baby, Mike knelt to check the dog, who tolerated his touch with obvious reluctance. No CR, Mike noted. Looks like he's been on his own for a while, but he's well-trained. Look how he's positioned himself between us and the baby. Any sign of the parents? Lisa asked, wrapping the awake infant in fresh blankets from her kit. Thomas shook his head. Cars, probably fully submerged by now. I tried to reach it, but took a fall. If there was anyone else inside. He didn't finish the sentence. Sheriff Anderson has divers standing by, Mike said grimly, but with the current and the darkness. Thomas nodded, understanding the grim reality. Water rescues quickly became recovery operations in conditions like these. The baby stable, Lisa announced it a miracle. She's not worse off. We need to get her to Springvale Memorial right away. What about the dog? Thomas looked at the German Shepherd, who was watching proceedings with alert, intelligent eyes. Despite its exhaustion, the dog had refused food or water, seemed unwilling to rest until it knew the baby was safe. I'll take him, Thomas, to decide it at least until we find out who he belongs to. He earned that much. As the paramedics prepared to transport the baby, the dog became visibly agitated, whining and pacing. He doesn't want to be separated from her, Thomas observed. Hospital won't allow animals in the ambulance, Mike said apologetically. Thomas nodded, kneeling beside the German Shepherd. Listen, boy, she's going to be... Look, they're taking her to people who can help her. You did your job. You saved her. Whether the dog understood his words or merely his tone, it seemed to calm slightly, though its eyes remained fixed on the bundled infant. As Lisa carried her out the door, I'll bring my truck around to the hospital later, Thomas told Mike. Let you know if we find any identification on this fellow. After the ambulance left, Thomas found himself alone with the German Shepherd. The storm still raged outside, but inside his cabin something had changed. For the first time since Sarah died, the rooms didn't feel quite so empty. Well, Thomas said to the dog, seems like we both could use a warm meal and some rest before heading to the hospital. What do you say? The German Shepherd cocked its head, regarding Thomas with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal. Should I'm going to call you Rocky? Thomas decided, because you're as solid as they come. Sound good, the dog. Rocky responded by finally collapsing onto the rug, allowing exhaustion to claim him. At last, Thomas heated some leftover stew, placing a bowl on the floor for Rocky, who ate ravenously once he realized food was being offered after they both eaten. Thomas told the remaining dampness from Rocky fur and checked him more thoroughly for injuries. You're a bit banged up, but nothing serious, Thomas told him. You're one tough customer, aren't you? As Thomas prepared to leave for the hospital, his phone rang. It was Officer James Reynolds. Mr. Parker, we've identified the vehicle. It's registered to an Emma Taylor, 28, single mother of an 8-month-old daughter named Sophia. Did you find her? The mother, Tom asked, his throat tight. Yes, Reynolds replied, his voice Somber, she was found about a 4-mile downstream, clinging to a fallen tree, hypothermic. But alive, she's at Springvale Memorial. Now being treated, she's been asking about her baby. Thank God Thomas breathed. The little one's there too. Paramedics took her in about an hour ago. There's something else you should know, Reynolds continued. Miss Taylor claims she wasn't driving when the accident happened, says someone forced her off the road deliberately. Sheriffs treating this as a potential crime scene. Thomas glanced at Rocky, who had risen to attention at the change in Thomas's voice. When you come to the hospital, Reynolds added, we'll need a statement about exactly what you saw after hanging up. Thomas knelt before Rocky. Seems like there's more to this story than a simple accident. That baby you save, her name is Sophia, and her mother's alive too. Rocky's tail wags slightly at this news, as if he understood. Let's go meet them properly, shall we? I think they owe you a thank you. When Thomas's truck pulled into the hospital parking lot, the storm had finally begun to subside. He'd fashioned a makeshift leash for Rocky using a length of rope, though he doubted the dog would run off. Something about Rocky's demeanor suggested he had a mission that wasn't yet complete. At the hospital entrance, nurse Kelly Williams intercepted them. I'm sorry, sir, but dogs aren't allowed inside except for registered service animals. This dog pulled a baby from Cedar Creek tonight. Thomas replied firmly, save her life. I think that earns him a visitor's pass, don't you? The nurse hesitated, looking at Rocky's alert, dignified stance. I'll take full responsibility, Thomas PR. He's clean, and he's well-behaved. 5 minutes, she relented. And only because you're Thomas Parker, everyone knows what you did for this town. When you were with the fire department inside, Officer Reynolds met them in the corridor, eyebrows raising at the sight of Rocky. So this is our hero, he said, bending slightly to look Rocky in the eyes. Remarkable animal. How's the mother? And Sophia, Thomas asked. Both stable. Miss Taylor has some explaining to do, though. Her story about being forced off the road, we're not sure what to make of it. There's been no other vehicles reported in the area. Just then a woman's voice rang out from a nearby room. Where's my baby? Please, I need to see my daughter, Thomas. And Rocky followed Reynolds to the doorway of a hospital room, where a young woman sat on the edge of a bed, arguing with Dr. Sophia Martinez. Emma Taylor was small boned, with auburn hair plastered to her pale face. Despite her evident exhaustion, fierce determination blazed in her eyes. Miss Taylor, you've experienced severe hypothermia. The doctor was saying you need to rest. I need to see Sophia. You don't understand. Emma's words died in her throat as she noticed a man in the doorway and the German shepherd standing alert between them. Oh my God, she whispered, eyes widening. That's the dog on the river. She swung her gaze to Thomas. You're the man who called 911. Thomas Parker. He introduced himself, and this is Rocky. He's the one who pulled Sophia from the car. Emma slid off the bed, ignoring the doctor's protests, and approached Rocky slowly. The German shepherd watched her with keen interest, but stayed perfectly still as she knelt before him. You saved my baby, she said, voice breaking. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gently placed her hands on either side of Rocky's face. How can I ever thank you? Rocky responded by gently licking a tear from her cheek in that moment. As Thomas watched the young mother embrace the dog that saved her child, he felt something shift inside him, a warmth he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Whatever had brought Rocky to Cedar Creek that night, whatever had led him to risk his life for a stranger's child, it wasn't chance. It was something more profound, and Thomas knew with sudden certainty that this story was far from overtelling. And preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke over Springvale Hospital with pale winter light filtering through the blinds of room 217. Emma Taylor sat in a chair beside a hospital crib, watching her daughter, Sophia, sleep peacefully. The events of the previous night still felt unreal. The car plunging into the icy river, the struggle to escape the certainty that she would lose her baby forever. I still don't understand, she whispered to Thomas, who sat across from her. Rocky lay at his feet, eyes perpetually alert despite his obvious exhaustion. How did your dog know Sophia was in the car? Thomas shook his head. Not my dog, never seen him before last night. He recounted finding Rocky at the riverbank and witnessing the rescue. He brought her straight to my cabin like he knew exactly where to go. Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears. Then it's even more miraculous, she reached down to stroke Rock. Had the German shepherd allowed her touch his eyes, never leaving baby Sophia. A knock interrupted them as Officer Reynolds entered, notebook in hand. M. Taylor, if you're feeling up to it, I need to ask you some more questions about the accident. Thomas moved to leave, but Emma grasped his wrist. please stay," her eyes pleaded with a mute. "And Rocky, I feel safer with you here." Reynolds pulled up a chair. "You claim someone forced you off the road. Can you describe what happened?" Emma straightened her voice steadier than before. "I was driving home from my evening shift at Sullivan's Diner. The storm was getting worse, but I needed to relieve my babysitter. As I approached the bridge, high beams appeared behind me, driving erratically. Did you recognize the vehicle? Large pickup truck, dark colored. It came up fast, nearly hitting my bumper. I sped up to get away, but it accelerated, swerving beside me." Emma's voice quavered, then it veered sharply into my lane. I jerked the wheel to avoid collision, and we went to the guardrail. Reynolds made notes. "Any idea who might have wanted to harm you?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "You can trust him," Thomas assured her. Thomas Parker was Springvale's fire chief for 30 years. "Everyone knows his character." Emma nodded slowly. "My ex-husband, Daniel Taylor. We've been separated for almost a year. He's been unstable, threatening. I have a restraining order." "Why didn't you mention this last night?" Reynolds asked, his tone sharpening. "Because I'm not certain it was him," Emma replied. "And because I reported his behavior before and nothing happened. Officer Mr. Benson always said I was overreacting." Thomas noticed Reynolds' expression darken at the mention of his colleague. "I'll look into this," Reynolds promised, standing, "and I'll have a patrol car drive by your house regularly after you're discharged." After Reynolds left, silence hung between Thomas and Emma. Finally, Thomas spoke. "What will you do now? Is your home safe?" "I don't know." Emma's voice was barely audible. "The car was everything I had. I can't afford another right now." Thomas hesitated, weighing his next words carefully. "My cabin has two bedrooms. My daughter's old room has been empty since she moved to Ohio. It's yours if you need it, just until you get back on your feet." Emma looked startled. "I couldn't impose you and be." Thomas assured her. "Truth is that place has been too quiet since my wife passed. Might be good to have some company." He gestured to Rocky. "Besides, I think he's appointed himself Sophia's guardian. Might be easier if you're all under one roof." Before Emma could respond, Dr. Martinez entered with discharge papers. "Both you and Sophia are doing remarkably well. All things considered, you're free to go home. But I want you back in 3 days for a follow-up. That's the other problem." Emma admitted. "My house is across town. Without a car," Dr. Martinez frowned, "I can arrange hospital transportation." "But no need," Thomas interjected. "I've offered them a place to stay." Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "That might be best. Emma needs rest and support right now." As they prepared to leave, Michael Bennett from the Springvale Gazette appeared in the doorway, camera in hand. "Mr. Park, I heard about what happened to Heroic Dog Rescue Mind. If I ask a few questions." Thomas moved to block the reporter's view of Emma and Sophia. "Not now, Bennett. The public would love this story." "I said not now." Thomas's tone left no room for argument. "These folks have been through enough without becoming a spectacle." Bennett retreated, but his parting words hung ominously in the air. "Interesting that this happened right where Miller Development wants to build their resort. Quite a coincidence." Thomas escorted Emma and Sophia to his truck, Rocky trotting beside them. Thomas had noticed how the German shepherd positioned himself between them and any strangers, always vigilant. "Who's Miller Development?" Emma asked. As they drove through Springville's snow-covered streets, Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Frank Miller Property, developer from Detroit. He's been trying to buy up land along Cedar Creek for years, wants to build a luxury resort. Most folks have refused to sell, including you. My cabin's been in the family for 3 generations. Not interested in Miller's money." Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror at Rocky, who sat alertly beside Sophia's car seat. "What?" Bennett was implying that your accident might be connected to Miller's plans. "That's quite a stretch." Emma cradled Sophia closer. "Nothing makes sense right now. Why would a stray dog save my baby? Why would he bring her specifically to your cabin? And who ran us off the road if not Daniel?" "One step at a time, Thomas. Counsel first. Let's get you settled, then we'll figure out the rest." Thomas's cabin, nestled among snow-laden pines, looked like something from a Christmas card. Inside, the warmth of a wood stove and the scent of pine created an immediate sense of comfort. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, taking the handcrafted furniture and family photos adorning the walls. "Sarah was a decorator," Thomas said, his voice softening. At his wife's name, "I've kept it the same," he showed Emma to a cozy bedroom with a crib already set up. "Olivia, my daughter, left this when they visited last Christmas with my grandson." Emma's eyes welled up. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need." Thomas waved away her gratitude. "Let's just get you two settled. I'll fix us some lunch in the kitchen." Thomas worked quietly, preparing sandwiches and heating soup. Rocky remained by Emma's side as she fed Sophia, the dog's attention never wavering from the child. "He's extraordinary," Emma observed, "the way he watches Over her, Thomas nodded. Reminds me of the K-9 units. We worked with the fire department. That level of focus, that intelligence. He's had professional training somewhere, but no collar, no microchip. According to the paramedics, where did he come from? Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Thomas moved to the window, his posture tensing. It's Frank Miller. Rocky was instantly alert. A low growl rumbling in his throat. Easy, boy, Thomas soothed, though his own expression had hardened. You and Sophia stay inside. I'll handle this. Thomas stepped on the porch as a sleek black SUV parked in front of his cabin. Frank Miller emerged, an imposing figure in an expensive overcoat, followed by his assistant Steve. Evans Parker Miller greeted his smile, not reaching his eyes. Heard about the excitement last night. Thought I'd check if everything's all right, since when you make house calls. Miller. Thomas crossed his arms. Just being neighborly. That section of road where the accident happened, it's part of the land I'm interested in developing. Dangerous curve. Their resort will include infrastructure improvements, make that area safer. Thomas's expression remained stony. The road was fine before the storm, and before someone ran Miss Taylor off it. Miller's smile faltered slightly. Accident reports say she lost control of the ice. That's not what she says. Miller shrugged. Trauma can affect memory, speaking of which he gestured toward the cabin. I heard you're housing a young lady and her child. Very generous. If they need more suitable accommodations, my company would be happy to arrange something in town. They're fine right where they are. Miller stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, Parker, I understand your attachment to this place, but you're sitting on prime real estate. My offer still stands 3 times market value. With that kind of money, you could move somewhere warmer, easier on those old firefighter injuries. Not interested, Thomas replied flatly. Never will be a commotion inside. Drew their attention. Rocky was barking sharply, his stance rigid by the window. Through the glass, Thomas could see the German shepherd's eyes fixed on Miller. Teeth bead. Miller took an involuntary step back. That the mutt that pulled the baby out might want to keep it under control. Rocky seems to be an excellent judge of character, Thomas remarked dryly. Miller's face hardened. This development is happening. Park of the town needs the economic boost. Tax revenue, jobs. The mayor's already on board. Don't end up on the wrong side of progress after. Miller left. Thomas returned inside to find Emma attempting to calm Rocky, who remained agitated. He really didn't like that man, Emma observed. Makes 2 of us. Thomas peered out the window, watching Miller's SUV disappear down the road. Miller showing up like this right after the accident. It's odd timing. Emma settled Sophia into the crib for a nap. Do you think there could be a connection between Miller wanting your land and what happened to us? Thomas shook his head. It's a stretch. Besides, you said yourself you thought it might be Daniel, but if it wasn't, Emma let the implication hang in the air. That evening, as snow began falling again, they sat before the fireplace. Sophia slept peaceful in her crib, while Rocky lay beside it, his self-appointed guard duty unwavering. Thomas had just poured them tea when his phone rang. Parker, he answered, then listened intently. Are you certain? I see. Thanks for letting me know. He hung up, his expression grave. That was Reynolds. They found your ex-husband, Daniel. He's been in county lockup since yesterday afternoon, drunk and disorderly at some bar in Oid. Couldn't have been him. Who ran you off the road? Emma set down her cup with shaking hands. Then who was it? Reynolds is looking into Miller's whereabouts last night, but it's all circumstantial at this point. Emma's gaze drifted to Rocky, who had risen and was staring intently at the front door. Thomas, the first, thinks someone's outside. Thomas moved swiftly to the window, peering through the curtains. There's a car down. The road lights off, engine running. Rocky's growl deep in his body tense as a bowstring called Reynolds. Thomas instructed, moving to the closet where he kept his hunting rifle. Tell him we need someone out here now. As Emma made the call, Thomas checked that the doors and windows were secure. Stay away from the windows, he warned. Keep Sophia close. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, the only sounds being Rocky's occasional growls and Sophia's soft breathing. Finally, red and blue lights flashed in the distance. The mysterious car's engine started, and it sped away before the patrol car could reach it. Officer Reynolds arrived moments later, flashlights sweeping the perimeter of the cabin. No sign of anyone now, he reported, but there are fresh tire tracks. Someone was definitely watching the place. This is no coincidence, Thomas insisted. First, Emma gets run off the road. Now this. Reynolds nodded grimly. I've been looking into Frank Miller. His company has been cited twice for environmental violations, and there are rumors he's not above using intimidation to get properties he wants. But why target me? Emma asked. I don't own any land he wants. Maybe you saw something you weren't supposed to, Reynolds suggested, or maybe you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. As Reynolds prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. I should warn you, Michael Bennett's article about the rescue is running in tomorrow's paper once this story Gets out, you'll have more attention than you want after. Reynolds left Emma sank onto the couch the way of the day, evident in her posture. I've dragged you into danger, she told Thomas. Maybe we should leave, find somewhere else to stay. Thomas sat beside her. Running won't solve anything. Whatever's happening, we'll face it together. He glanced at Rocky, who had returned to his position by Sophia's crib. All of us, Emma, followed his gaze, a faint smile touching her lips. He really is remarkable, isn't he, the way he saved Sophia, the way he watches over her now. It's almost like he was meant to find her. I've seen a lot of my years as a firefighter, Thomas said, quietly enough to know that sometimes things happen that defy simple explanation. Call it fate, divine intervention, whatever you like. But Rocky showing up when and where he did, that wasn't just chance. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Springvale in a blanket of white. Inside Thomas's cabin, an unlikely family found itself forming, a retired firefighter mourning his wife, a young mother fighting for a fresh start, a baby saved from the brink of death, and a mysterious dog whose appearance had changed everything. None of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine, all the challenges that still awaited them. But in that moment, despite the questions and the lingering threat, there was also a sense of purpose, a feeling that together they might find not just answers, but healing. Morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows as Thomas set a cup of coffee in front of Emma. The Springvale Gazette lay open on the kitchen table, headline boldly proclaiming miracle rescue, stray dog saves baby from freezing river. Beneath was a photo of Thomas's cabin, clearly taken without permission. Bennett didn't waste any time, Thomas grumbled, scanning the article. At least he kept your names out of it. Emma cradled Sophia in one arm while attempting to eat her breakfast with the other. Small mercies, I suppose. 3 days had passed since the rescue. The story had spread through Springvale like wildfire, with each retelling growing more elaborate. Some claimed Rocky had pulled both Emma and Sophia from the car. Others insisted he performed CPR on the baby. The truth was remarkable enough. Without embellishment, Rocky, who had barely left Sophia's side since the rescue, suddenly perked up, ears forward. Seconds later, a vehicle approached on the gravel drive. Popular Place, Thomas remarked, moving to the window. It's Dr. Wilson from the animal clinic. Dr. Meredith Wilson was a practical woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She stepped from her truck, carrying a medical bag, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Morning, Thomas, she greeted. Thought I'd check on our local celebrity. Her gaze fell on Rocky, who watched her with cautious interest. May I? Thomas nodded. He's where strangers, but not aggressive. Dr. Wilson knelt slowly, allowing Rocky to sniff her hand before attempting to examine him. Hello, handsome. Let's see how you're doing, too. Everyone surprised, Rocky permitted the examination with unusual patience, though he kept glancing at Sophia, as if checking that she remained safe. He's underweight, but otherwise healthy, Dr. Wilson concluded, scratching behind Rocky's ears. No microchip that I could detect. High-quality breeding, though. German Shepherd with maybe some Belgian Malinois and his behavior. She trailed off, observing how Rocky immediately returned to his position beside Sophia's portable bassinet. What about it, Emma asked. It's typical of specialized training, search and rescue, possibly police work. Dr. Wilson reached into her bag. I brought some premium dog food and vitamins to help him regain his strength, and I've been asking around about missing dogs matching his description. Any leads? Thomas asked. Nothing local, but I did find something interesting. She produced a tablet, pulling up a news article 6 months ago. There was a break-in at Allied K9 Training Center near Detroit. 3 specialized search and rescue dogs were stolen. 1 was recovered, 1 was found deceased, and the 3rd, she showed him a photo of a German Shepherd that looked remarkably like Rocky, was never found. Emma leaned closer. That could be him. The markings are similar, Dr. Wilson agreed. If it is the same dog, his name would be Ranger, not Rocky. He was being trained for water rescue, and missing person search is valued at over $20,000. Thomas whistled lowly. No wonder someone stolen. The real question, Dr. Wilson continued, is how he ended up here in Springvale, exactly when and where he was needed most. Before anyone could speculate further, Thomas's phone rang. It's Reynolds, he said, answering. His expression darkened as he listened. Will be right there. After hanging up, he turned to Emma. They recovered your car from the creek. Reynolds wants us to take a look before they tow it to the impound lot. Says there's something we need to see. 20 minutes later, they stood at the riverbank where Emma's blue sedan had been dragged from the water. The vehicle was a crumpled mess, windows shattered, interior ruined by the creek's frigid water. Officer Reynolds waited beside it, his expression grim. Thanks for coming, he greeted them, nodding at Rocky, who had insisted on accompanying them. I wanted you to see this before it goes to the evidence garage. He LED'd them to the driver's side of the car, pointing to a deep indentation in the rear quarter panel. This damage isn't consistent with hitting the guardrail or rolling down the embankment. This came from another vehicle striking yours at high speed. Emma pad. Someone did run me off the road. There's more. Reynolds opened what remained of the trunk. Inside was a waterlogged duffel bag. This was tucked under the spare tire compartment. We found it during the recovery. Thomas peered at the bag. What is it? $10,000 in cash. In this, Reynolds carefully extracted a sealed plastic bag containing a black ledger. It's mostly ruined by water, but there are names and numbers visible. One of them is Frank Miller. Emma stared in disbelief. That's not mine. I've never seen it before. I believe you, Reynolds assured her, which raises the question. Who put it there, and why Rocky, who had been examining the car with apparent interest, suddenly growled his attention fixed on something in the distance. They all turned to see a black SUV parked on the road above its tinted windows, preventing identification of the occupants. That's Miller's vehicle. Thomas said quietly, as if hearing his words. The SUV's engine started, and then it pulled away smoothly. He's monitoring the recovery. Reynolds noted, interesting. Back at the cabin, Emma paced the living room, agitation evident in every movement. Someone planted that money in my car. They tried to kill me and Sophia, and now they're watching us. Thomas placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Reynolds is taking the evidence seriously. The ledger might provide answers. What if it doesn't? Emma's voice cracked. I can't live like this, always looking over my shoulder, afraid for Sophia. Rocky, sensing her distress, pressed against her legs, offering silent comfort. Emma knelt to hug him, burying her face in his fur. What would we have done without you? She whispered. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Thomas answered to find Carol Davis, a social worker from Family Services, standing on the porch. Mr. Parker, I'm here to check Emma Taylor and her daughter. Her tone was professional, but not unkind. We received a report expressing concern about the baby's living situation. Thomas reluctantly led her and Emma straightened, instantly on the defensive. Sophia is perfectly fine. Who reported us? I'm not at liberty to say, Carol replied, though her discomfort was evident. I'm just following protocol. She glanced at Rocky, who had positioned himself between her and Sophia. Is a dog safe around the infant? He saved her life, Thomas stated flatly. Carol conducted her inspection, officially checking Sophia's condition, the safety of her sleeping area, and the adequacy of supplies. Eventually, she closed her notebook with a sigh. Everything seems in order. The baby is healthy, well cared for, and obviously loved, but she hesitated. I should inform you that the report specifically questioned Miss Taylor's fitness as a mother, citing the accident as evidence of negligence. That's absurd, Thomas protested. Emma was run off the road. It was a deliberate act. Carol held up her hand. I'm just telling you what was reported. Given what I've observed, I see no ground for concern. But you should know that Frank Miller was quite insistent when he called our office. After Carol left, Emma collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. He's trying to take Sophia away from me. Why? What does he want? Thomas sat beside her, his weathered face set in determined lines. I don't know yet, but we're going to find out. Miller's gone too far. That evening, as Emma put Sophia to bed, Thomas received another visitor. Hank Peterson, a former K-9 trainer who had worked with the fire department before retirement, stood on the porch examining Rocky with expert eyes. Meredith Wilson was right. He confirmed after a thorough assessment, this dog has received specialized training, search and rescue water. Rescue, possibly tracking the way he responds to commands, his focus. You don't see that in ordinary pets. Can you tell where he might have come from? Thomas asked, hard to say for certain. Hank knelt, checking Rocky's teeth. But I'll tell you this, there's only a handful of facilities that train to this level. Allied in Detroit is one. I've got contacts there. Let me make some calls. After Hank left, Thomas found Emma in the kitchen, staring out the window at the darkening forest. You're thinking about leaving, aren't you? He asked quietly. She didn't turn it. Cross my mind. Take Sophia and start over somewhere Miller can't find us, and go where? With what money? Thomas moved beside her. Running isn't the answer, Emma. Whatever Miller's up to, whatever was in that ledger, it's bigger than just us now. Reynolds is on our side. We need to trust the process. The process. Emma turned to him, eyes flashing. The process nearly got us killed. The process had social services at our door today. The process. Her words were cut short by Rocky's sudden bark. Sharp alert, a warning. Both turned to see headlights approaching the cabin, not from a main road, but from a seldom used logging track through the woods. Thomas moved swiftly to the gun cabinet, retrieving his rifle. Get Sophia, go to the back bedroom and lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Emma gathered her sleeping daughter from the crib and hurried to the bedroom, Rocky following protectively at her heels. Thomas positioned himself by the Window rifle ready as the vehicle, an unmarked white van stopped at the edge of the property. Two men emerged, moving with purpose toward the cabin. Through the darkness, Thomas couldn't make out there. The window-framed Thomas heard him scrambling away, followed by the sound of the van's engine starting. By the time Reynolds arrived, the intruders were gone, leaving behind only a broken window, a scrap of fabric from a torn jacket, and a fresh wave of fear. And they were coming for Sophia. Emma whispered, trembling, as paramedics checked her for injuries. The way they headed straight for the bedroom, ignoring everything else. Reynolds collected the fabric sample, placing it in an evidence bag. Will run. Prints on a window frame and glass between this and the ledger from your car. We're building a case. He looked at Thomas. But I think it's time to consider relocating you. All this place is too isolated, too vulnerable. Where will we go? Thomas asked if Miller's behind this. And I bet my pension is his reach extends throughout Springvale. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. I might have an idea. My brother-in-law owns a hunting cabin in the next county. It's remote, but there's a deputy station nearby. No. One would connect it to either you. Thomas glanced at Emma, who nodded slowly. Exhaustion and fear etched in her face. We'll leave at first light. Thomas decided. Only Reynolds knows where we're going that night. None of them slept much. Thomas took watch in the living room, rifle across his lap. Emma and Sophia stayed in the bedroom. Rocky standing guard by the repaired window. As dawn tinged the eastern sky with pink, Thomas prepared the truck for departure. They would take only essentials: clothes, food, baby supplies. Emma moved mechanically, her earlier fire dimmed by the night's events. We'll get through this, Thomas told her, helping load a box of Sophia's things. Reynolds will uncover the truth about Miller, about the ledger. We just need to stay safe. Until then. Emma managed a war smile. When did this become your fight? Thomas, you could walk away. Let us handle this alone. Thomas thought of Sarah, how she would have responded to someone in need. The moment Rocky brought Sophia to my door, it became my fight. We're in this together now. As they prepared for the final trip to the truck, Rocky suddenly tensed, ears forward, attention fixed on the tree line. Thomas followed his gaze, but saw nothing in the early morning mist. What is it, boy? He murmured. Rocky's response was a low, rumbling growl, a sound they had come to recognize as a warning. Someone was watching. A hunting cabin nestled deep in the woods of neighboring Elkridge County offered little in the way of luxury, but its isolation provided something far more valuable: safety. After 3 tense days of lying low, the constant vigilance had begun to wear on all of them. Even Rocky showed signs of fatigue, though he remained dutifully alert. Whenever Sophia was awake, Thomas stood on the small porch, scanning the tree line. As the morning fog lifted, the cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by dense pine forest, with only a narrow dirt track connecting it to the main road 2 miles away, perfect for hiding, difficult for escape if they were discovered. Emma joined him, wrapping a borrowed sweater tightly around herself. Any word from Reynolds? Thomas shook his head. Cell reception spotty out here. I'll drive to the highway later to check messages. Inside Sophia's CD from her makeshift crib, a drawer padded with blankets. The baby had adjusted to their circumstances with remarkable resilience, finding delight in Rocky's constant attention and the changing patterns of light through the cabin windows. I've been thinking, Emma said quietly, watching her daughter, about Rocky, about how he knew to save Sophia. That night, Thomas waited, knowing there was more. Dr. Wilson said he was trained for water rescue, but that doesn't explain how he found us in the storm or why he brought Sophia specifically to your cabin. Emma turned to Thomas, her expression troubled. What if someone sent him? You think Miller stole the dogs from Allied, that Rocky was part of his plan somehow? Emma shook her head. I don't know, but there are too many coincidences. My car going into the creek right near your property, the ledger, my trunk, Rocky appearing exactly when needed. Nothing about this feels random. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Thomas immediately reached for his rifle, but relaxed when he recognized Reynolds' patrol car approaching. Rocky, however, remained tense, moving to stand detectively near Sophia. Reynolds emerged from the car, looking haggard, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. He carried a thick folder under his arm. Sorry for not calling ahead, he apologized, entering the cabin. But after what I found, I didn't want to risk any electronic communication. He spread several documents across the kitchen table: photographs, property records, bank statements, and a partially restored version of the ledger from Emma's car. Frank Miller isn't just a developer, Reynolds began. He's involved in something much bigger. The ledger contains coded references to property purchases all along Cedar Creek, but with payment amounts far exceeding market value. Thomas studied the documents. Money laundering. That's my guess. Miller Development buys land at inflated prices, builds luxury properties, and sells them to shell companies. Perfect way to clean dirty money. Reynolds pointed to a list of names. These are Miller's investors, some very powerful people in the state. What does this have to do with me? Emma asked, clutching Sophia. Closer, why target us? Reynolds produced a map of Springvale with Cedar Creek. Highlighted in blue-red marks indicated properties Miller had acquired. Your accident happened here. He said, pointing to a bend in the creek. Thomas's cabin is here. But the key property Miller hasn't secured yet is this one. He indicated a parcel directly between them owned by an elderly woman named Linda Cooper. Mrs. Cooper has refused to sell for years. Thomas noted her family has owned that land for generations, and 2 days before Emma's accident, she finally agreed to talk with Miller about an offer. Reynolds tapped another document, but she had conditions and environmental impact study guarantees about preserving creek access. Miller was meeting with her the night of the storm. Emma frowned. I still don't understand the connection. Your route home from Sullivan's Diner took you right past the Cooper property at exactly the time Miller would have been leaving. Reynolds paused. I think you saw something you weren't supposed to see, and Miller couldn't risk you remembering or identifying him. But I didn't see anything. Emma protested. It was storming. I was focused on the road. Maybe he couldn't take that chance. Reynolds shuffled through more papers. There's something else. Miller's company employs a man named Victor Krause, former military, specializes in security. He has a record of assault charges that never stuck, and he was previously employed by Allied K-9 Training Center, the place those dogs were. Stolen from Thomas and Emma exchanged glances. He took the dogs. Thomas said quietly, but YK9 units trained for search and rescue can sell for huge sums overseas. Reynolds explained black market for them in countries without established training programs. But Rocky, or Ranger, as he was called, escaped. Emma looked at Rocky, who remained vigilant by Sophia's side. You think he escaped from Krause and was hiding near Cedar Creek when our car went in? It would explain his appearance and why he wasn't found with the other stolen dogs. Reynolds confirmed, but not why he brought Sophia specifically to Thomas's cabin. A comfortable silence fell as they all watched Rocky, who seemed unaware of being the center of attention. Thomas moved a scratch behind the German shepherd's ears, an action the dog now accepted without hesitation. Whatever his reasons, Thomas said softly, I'm grateful he chose my doorstep. Reynolds gathered his documents. I've got enough to request warrants for Miller and Krause. The partial prints from your broken window match Crow's, and the fabric matches fibers from a jacket he was photographed wearing at a town meeting last month. So it's almost over. Emma asked, hopefully not quite. Reynolds cautioned. Miller has friends in high places. A judge I need for the warrants is out of town until tomorrow. Until then, you should stay here. After Reynolds departed, promising to return the following day, Thomas set about securing the cabin for the night. Emma put Sophia down for her evening nap, humming softly as the baby's eyes grew heavy. She's getting so attached to this place, Emma observed as Thomas returned from checking perimeter. To you, to Rocky, I worry about uprooting her again when this is all over. Thomas arranged logs and fireplace, avoiding Emma's gaze. Where will you go after? Emma sank into a chair. I don't know. My apartment was month to month. Most of my things were in the car. I'll have to start over somewhere. You could stay, Thomas said quietly. Still focus on the fire of the cabin. It gets lonely there with just memories for company. Before Emma could respond, Rocky suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a warning sound they had come to recognize. Thomas moved swiftly to a window. Appearing through a gap in the curtains, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows through trees. But he saw nothing unusual. Maybe a deer, he suggested, though. His tone lacked conviction. Rocky wasn't convinced either. He moved to the door, his posture rigid, hackles raised. Thomas retrieved his rifle from beside the fireplace. Emma, get Sophia and go to the back bedroom. Lock the door. As Emma hurried to comply, Thomas checked that all entrances were secure. The cabin had minimal windows, all latched from the inside. The only vulnerable points were front and back doors. Rocky continued to growl softly, his attention now fixed on the rear of the cabin. Thomas followed, weapon ready. A floorboard creaked outside the back door. Thomas signaled for Rocky to stand back, positioning himself to the side of the door frame. I know you're in there, Parker. The voice was unfamiliar, deep, and confident. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just want what belongs to us. There's nothing here that belongs to you. Thomas called back, gesturing for Rocky to go to Emma and Sophia. A harsh laugh responded. The dog, the money, the ledger, all ours. Hand them over, and we walk away. Everyone lives happily ever after. You tried to kill a mother and her. Baby Thomas countered, "That's not walking away. Clean accidents happen," the voice replied, "especially on icy roads. But intentionally keeping evidence that could damage certain reputations, that's asking for trouble." Thomas heard movement at the front of the cabin, a second person trying the door handle. They were surrounded. "Last chance," Parker the voice continued. "The boss is willing to be generous, $50,000 to walk away. That's retirement money." For a washed-up firefighter, Thomas remained silent, mind racing. Reynolds wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Help was at least 30 minutes away, even if he could call for it. He needed to buy time. "I need to discuss it with Miss Taylor." He called. "Finally, give us 10 minutes, 5. The voice counted. "Then we're coming in whether you like it or not." Thomas hurried to the back bedroom, finding Emma huddled in the corner. With Sophia clutched to her chest, Rocky stood before them, a living shield. "They want the dog and the evidence." Thomas explained in hushed tones. "They've offered money for us to walk away." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "They tried to kill us. I know." "I'm stalling." Thomas moved to the small window, trying to catch a glimpse of their visitors. "There are at least 2 of them, probably Kraus, and someone from Miller's outfit." "What do we do?" Emma whispered, fear evident in her voice. Tomas assessed their options. The cabin had no cellar, no attic, nowhere to hide. Fighting might mean casualties on both sides, running meant exposure. Vulnerability. His gaze fell on Rocky, who watched him with those intelligent eyes. A plan began to form. "Do you trust me?" he asked Emma. She nodded without hesitation. "Then here's what we do." Minutes later, Thomas called through the door. "We've discussed your offer. We want double, 100,000. And we forget everything we've seen and heard." A pause. "Then the boss needs to prove that." "I'll make a call." Thomas heard retreating footsteps, followed by the murmur of conversation too distant to make out it was. Working, they were buying time. He turned to Emma, who had changed into Thomas's spare jacket and had in the dimness, with Sophia strapped securely to her chest. Under the coat, she could pass for a man at a distance. "Remember the route we discussed?" Thomas instructed. "Stay low, keep to the trees." The sheriff's station. "His 4 Mill South deputy, Willis, will be on duty. Tell him everything." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "What about you?" "I'll keep them occupied, make them think you're still here." "Rocky and I can handle ourselves," as if understanding his role. Rocky pressed against Thomas's leg, unwavering in his loyalty. Emma grasped Thomas's hand. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll keep Sophia safe." He counted gently. "I will with my life." Thomas LED them to a small window at the rear of the cabin opposite from where he'd heard the intruder. The window was narrow, but Emma was slender. With Thomas's help, she squeezed through. Sophia secure against her chest, miraculously still sleeping. "Go," Thomas urged. "Don't stop until you reach Willis." Emma hesitated just a moment, then vanished into the growing darkness. Thomas closed the window, but left it unlocked in case he needed an escape route. "Time's up." Parker the voice called from outside. "What's your answer?" Thomas moved back to the door. "We want proof. You can pay cash on delivery." "Not how this works. You show good faith by returning our property. Then you get paid." "Your property tried to kill a woman and her child," Thomas replied, letting anger creep into his voice. "Forgive me if I don't trust you." A heavy thud against the door punctuated his statement. They were done talking. Thomas backed away, rifle ready. Rocky positioned himself in the hallway, tensed and waiting. The first seat crash against the door was expected. The second splintered the frame. By the third, the lock gave way and 2 men burst into the cabin. Thomas recognized Victor Kraus immediately from Reynolds' description. Tall, military built, with a face hardened by violence. His companion was younger, probably one of Miller's regular employees, drafted for muscle. "Where are the woman and the kid?" Kraus demanded. Eyes scanning the cabin. "Safe." Thomas replied. "Beyond your reach." Kraus sneer. "We'll see about that." He gestured his companion. "Check the back." As the younger man moved toward the hallway, Rocky emerged from the shadows. Teeth beat. A growl building in his throat. Recognition flashed across Kraus's face. Well, if it isn't the runaway mutt himself." Rocky's growl deepened, his focus entirely on Kraus. "That dog cost me 20 grand." Kraus spat. "You to put him down when I had the chance. He's not yours to claim." Thomas responded. Rifle raised. "Never was." Kraus laughed. "You go to shoot me, old man, over a dog and some strangers? Is that worth spending your retirement in prison?" A moment hung in the balance as Thomas weighed his options. He'd never taken a human life, not even during his most dangerous days as a firefighter. But looking at Kraus, at the man who tried to kill Emma and Sophia, who'd stolen and likely abused Rocky, he felt a cold certainty settle over him. "Get out." Thomas ordered, voice steady. "Get out while you still can." Kraus's face hardened. "Not without." What we came for. Time seemed to slow as Kraus reached inside his jacket. Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, another sound split the air. A police siren wailing in the distance. But growing closer, confusion crossed Kraus's face. "You said the cop wasn't coming back until tomorrow." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "I guess plans change." A younger intruder reappeared from the back. "We need to go now," Krause hesitated clearly, torn between completing his mission and avoiding capture. Finally, he backed toward the door. "This isn't over for your sake. It should be Thomas," replied. The intruders fled into the night as headlights appeared on the dirt track leading to the cabin. Thomas lowered his rifle, adrenaline still coursing through his system. Rocky remained vigilant, muscles tense, until patrol car came fully into view. Not Reynolds, Thomas realized, as the driver emerged, but Deputy Willis from the Elkridge Sheriff's Department. Behind him, Emma hurried forward, Sophia still secure against her chest. Thomas. She called, relief evident in her voice. "Are you all right?" Before he could answer, Rocky bounded out of the cabin, racing to Emma, and Sophia circling him protectively before pressing against Emma's legs. In clear relief were fine. Thomas assured her, moving to embrace them both. "How did you reach Willis?" "So quickly I didn't have to go all the way to the station," Emma explained. "He was already patrolling nearby. By roads, we practically ran into his car." Willis approached, radio in hand. "I've called for backup to search the area. Those men can't have gone far on foot." He glanced at the broken door. "They broke in." Thomas nodded. "Victor Krause and an associate. They wanted Rocky and the evidence against Miller." Emma clutched Thomas's arm. "It's not safe here anymore. They'll come back, not tonight, they won't." Willis assured them. "I got units setting up roadblocks on every access point, and Reynolds is on his way with the warrants. By morning, Miller and Krause will be in custody." As Willis secured a cabin, Thomas led Emma inside, helping her remove the bulky jacket. Sophia, finally awakened by the commotion, blinked drowsily before breaking into a gummy smile at the sight of Rocky, who positioned himself protectively at her side. "Once more, you should have gone with him," Emma said quietly. Once Sophia was settled, it was too dangerous to stay behind. Thomas shook his head. "Someone had to keep them occupied while you escaped. Besides," he nodded toward Rocky, "we had the advantage." A surprise, Emma studied him, her expression softening. "You barely know us, yet you risked your life." Why? Thomas considered his answer carefully. The truth was he wasn't entirely sure himself. Something had changed the moment Rocky had appeared on his doorstep with Sophia. A purpose had returned to his life after months of merely existing in the wake of Sarah's death. "Because you needed help," he said simply, "and because some things are worth fighting for." Emma's eyes glistened in the dim light. "And after this is over, what then?" Thomas gazed at Sophia, now playfully reaching for Rocky's fur, and at the German shepherd who had brought them all together to what could only be described as fate or providence, one step at a time. He said softly, "But whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside, the night deepened as they waited for Reynolds to arrive with the warrants that would finally bring Miller's operation crashing down. The danger wasn't over, far from it, but for the first time since that stormy night when Rocky had appeared with Sophia clutched gently in his jaws, Thomas felt something like hope taking root in his heart. A family was forming here, not of blood, but of circumstance, courage, and choice, and that, Thomas reflected, might be the most precious gift of all. Dawn broke over Springvale with news that spread like wildfire through the small town. Frank Miller, prominent developer and self-proclaimed pillar of the community, had been arrested along with his head of security, Victor K.R.A. The charges were numerous and damning: money laundering, attempted murder, kidnapping, theft, environmental violations, and conspiracy. Thomas watched the coverage from Sheriff Anderson's office, where Emma sat with Sophia on her lap and Rocky at her feet. The German shepherd hadn't left their side since the confrontation at the hunting cabin the previous night. Miller's lawyers are already making noise, Sheriff Anderson informed them, clicking off the television. But with the evidence Reynolds gathered, plus your testimonies and the recovered ledger, we got a solid case. Reynolds entered carrying a tray of coffee cups. The judge denied bail for both Miller and Krause. Too much flight risk. He handed cups to Thomas, and the sheriff, offering Emma a gentle smile. "How are you holding up?" "Still processing," she admitted, gently bouncing Sophia on her knee. "It doesn't feel real, yet there's something else you should know." Reynolds continued producing a file. "We contacted Allied K9 Training Center about Rocky. They confirmed he was one of the dogs stolen 6 months ago, registered as Ranger. They're sending representatives to identify and collect him." Emma's arms tightened around Sophia. "Collect him? They can't just take him legally." "They can," Reynolds replied apologetically. "He's their property, valued at over $220,000, and they've been searching for him since the theft." Thomas knelt beside Rocky, running a hand through the dog's thick fur. "When will they arrive?" "Tomorrow morning. I've arranged for them to meet you at your cabin." Reynolds hesitated. "I know you've all grown attached to him, but these people invested years of training into Rocky Ranger, and there are other families who would benefit from his skills." Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand," but the expression on Emma's face suggested she didn't understand at all. As they left the sheriff's office, She remained silent, her composure brittle, as glass back at Thomas's cabin now secured, with new locks and reinforced doors courtesy of Tim Cooper. And his construction crew Emma finally voiced what they were both feeling they can't. "Take him," she said, watching as Rocky played gently with Sophia on the living room rug. "He belongs with us now." He saved Sophia. He saved all of us, Thomas sighed, settling into his armchair. "I don't like it either, but Reynolds is right. Rocky Ranger was trained for a purpose. He's meant to help people. He is helping people. He's helping us." Emma paced the room, agitation evident in every movement. "Without him, Sophia would be dead. I would probably be dead too. And you," she turned to Thomas, "you'd still be alone." Here, talking to Sarah's memory, the words stung because they contained truths in Sarah's passing. Thomas had retreated from life, content to exist in the quiet solitude of grief. But Rocky's arrival had changed everything, forcing him back into the world, giving him purpose again. "Maybe there's a way," Thomas said finally. All lied, might consider a private adoption. Once they understand the circumstances, they'd still recoup their investment, and Rocky could stay with people who love him. Emma's expression. "Brighton, we could apply between your pension and my savings. Maybe we could." M. Taylor, Mr. Parker, a woman's voice called from outside, interrupting their conversation. Thomas moved the window, surprised to see Dr. Meredith Wilson climbing out her truck. She wasn't alone. An older man accompanied her, his weathered face familiar. Somehow, George Wilson. Thomas murmured recognition, dawning Meredith's father. Emma joined him at the window. The retired veterinarian. "What are they doing here?" Thomas opened the door, greeting both Wilsons with cautious warmth. Rocky approached Meredith with familiarity, accepting her scratch behind his ears before turning his attention to George, sniffing the older man's hand with evident interest. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," Meredith began, "but after what happened with Miller Dad, and I thought you might need some support, especially regarding Rocky Ranger." Thomas corrected gently. "That's his real name, apparently." George Wilson, a man of few words by reputation, knelt with some difficulty to examine Rocky more thoroughly. "He was never Ranger," the older man said, his voice gruff, but kind-born. "Atlas trained as Ranger, but always meant to be Rocky." Emma and Thomas exchanged confused glances. "I don't understand," Emma said. George struggled to his feet, accepting his daughter's steadying hand. "May we come in? There's a story you should hear." Unsettled in the living room, George began his tale, his eyes never leaving Rocky, who had returned to his position near Sophia. "I worked with Allied K9 before retirement," he explained, "helped develop their water rescue program. This dog," he nodded toward Rocky, "was special from the start. Exceptional intelligence, perfect temperament. We called him Atlas because he carried the weight of our expectations." Meredith took up the narrative. "When Dad retired, he stayed in touch with the trainers. They kept him updated on Atlas's progress even after they renamed him Ranger for the official program 6 months ago." George continued. "Allied contacted me about a potential placement, a retired firefighter with PTSD who lived alone near water. They thought Ranger would be a perfect service companion." Thomas leaned forward, realization dawning. "You're saying Rocky was meant to come to me before the theft?" George nodded. "Your application had been approved. Delivery was scheduled for following week. Then the break-in happened, and Ranger disappeared." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "But that's impossible. The timing, the coincidence. I've worked with rescue dogs my entire career," George replied, "and I learned long ago that they sometimes understand things we don't, connections we can't explain." He gestured toward Rocky. "And Sophia, this dog didn't randomly save your daughter. He didn't accidentally bring her to Thomas's door. He was following his training. And something more." Meredith pulled several documents from her bag. "Allie's representatives are coming tomorrow to identify and collect him." "But Dad, and I thought you should have these before they arrived." Thomas accepted the papers. Among them was his original application for a service dog dated 7 months earlier. Sarah had submitted it during her final weeks, knowing Thomas would need companionship after she was gone. "Sarah did this," Thomas whispered, recognizing her handwriting on the forms. Meredith nodded. "She came to the clinic for advice when she first received your diagnosis. She was worried about you being alone." Emotion tightened to S' throat as he read Sarah's words describing his condition, his needs, her hopes for his future. Even facing her own mortality, she had been thinking of him, planning for his happiness. After she was gone, there's one more thing, George said, producing a final document. "Allied is concerned about publicity. The story of a stolen service dog saving a baby from a river is already spreading. They prefer to avoid media attention during what could be a traumatic separation." "What are you suggesting?" Emma asked, hope edging into her voice. "A private adoption," Meredith explained. "Dad contacted the director of Allied last night. They're willing to formalize Rocky's placement with you, Thomas, as originally intended, with the understanding that Emma and Sophia would remain part of his environment. They'd let us keep him, Emma asked, hardly daring to believe it with conditions. George cautioned Thomas would be his primary handler. You'd need complete certain training modules, and Allied would require periodic assessments to ensure Rocky's skills are maintained there. Would be cost. Meredith added, though significantly reduced from the standard placement fee. Thomas looked at Emma, seeing his own joy reflected in her eyes. We can manage that. But between us, George smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. I thought you might say that, which is why I brought the preliminary agreement with me. We can have it signed before Allie's representatives arrive tomorrow, as Meredith and her father departed, having settled the details of Rocky's official adoption. Thomas found Emma on the porch, watching Sophia crawl in the grass under Rocky's watchful eye. So he was always meant to be yours, Emma said softly. Sarah arranged it all before she even knew about us. Thomas leaned against the railing. Sarah always did think ahead, but I don't think even she could have predicted this. He gestured toward Sophia. And Rocky, this family we've somehow formed, is that what we are now? Emma asked, turning to face him fully a family. The question hung between them, laden with possibility. In the week since Rocky had appeared with Sophia on his doorstep, Thomas had felt himself awakening from the fog of grief, finding purpose and connection again. And Emma, despite her youth and the differences in their backgrounds, had become someone he couldn't imagine his life without if he wants to be. He said finally, his voice gentle. The cabin's big enough for all of us. Sophia could grow up with space to run a creek to, explore when she's older, and you could finish your nursing degree at Springvale Community College like you always wanted. Emma's eyes widened. How did you know about that? Thomas smiled. Reynolds mentioned it. Said you put on hold when Sophia came along. I'd given up on that dream. Emma admitted, a single mother with no support system, no resources. You have support now, Thomas assured her. You have me, you have Rocky. And once the news about Miller breaks fully, you'll have a whole town behind you. Emma's gaze returned to Sophia, who had grabbed fistfuls of Rocky's fur, pulled herself into a standing position. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, allowing the baby to use him for balance. It won't be easy. She warned people will talk the age difference, how quickly it all happened. Let them talk, Thomas replied. We know what matters. The sound of a vehicle approaching interrupted their conversation. Reynolds' patrol car pulled up. The officer, looking more relaxed than they had seen him in days. Thought you want to know, he called as he approached Miller, singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal. His operation was bigger than we thought. Connections to organized crime in Detroit, bribery of local officials. Anyone we know? Thomas asked, nodded grimly. Mayor Thompson has resigned effective immediately. And Officer Benson, the one who dismissed Emma's concerns about her ex-husband, has been suspended pending investigation. So it's really over. Emma breathed. We're safe, and potentially compensated. Reynolds added, the duh is talking about restitution for victims. That could mean a sizable settlement for us, Emma, given what they put you through. As Reynolds departed, promising to keep them updated, Emma turned back to Thomas, a new lightness in her expression, a fresh start. She murmured, for all of us. Thomas nodded, watching as Rocky guided Sophia back toward the porch, the baby giggling with each wobbly step. Sarah would have loved this, he said softly, seeing the cabin full of life again. Emma slipped her hand into his gesture, so natural it felt as if they'd been doing for years. She made it possible, the application for Rocky, the timing of it all. She's still taking care of you in a way. Thomas squeezed her hand gently, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced since before Sarah's diagnosis. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Thomas, Emma, Sophia, and Rocky, an unconventional family brought together by tragedy and saved by the incredible bond between a child and a dog who was always meant to find them. As evening fell, Thomas stood at the edge of Cedar Creek. Rocky beside him, the water that had nearly claimed Sophia's life now flowed peacefully within its banks. The storm's fury long subsided. You knew, didn't you? Thomas asked the German shepherd. Somehow you knew exactly where to bring her. Rocky looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should. Then, as if satisfied that his mission was complete, he pressed against Thomas's leg, a gesture of loyalty and affection that needed no words. From the cabin's porch, Emma called him for dinner, Sophia babbling happily in her arms. As they turned toward home, toward family, Thomas felt gratitude wash over him for Sarah's final gift, for Rocky's inexplicable appearance on that stormy night, for Emma and Sophia, who had brought laughter back into spaces long filled with silence. Some might call it coincidence. Others, fate. Thomas preferred to think of it as a series of small miracles, beginning with a German shepherd who dove into a freezing river to save a child he had never met, and who in doing so had saved them all. Spring arrived in Springvale with a gentle persistence melting away. The last remnants of the brutal winter Cedar Creek, once a threat that had nearly claimed Sophia's life, now babbled peacefully past Thomas's cabin bordered by wildflowers and fresh green grass. 3 months had passed since Frank Miller's arrest. Trial was still months away, but the evidence against him mounted daily as former associates turned state's witness in exchange for leniency. Victor Krause had already pleaded guilty to multiple charges, his sentence reduced for testimony against his employer. For Thomas, Emma, Sophia, and Rocky life had found a new rhythm. The cabin that had once echoed with Thomas's solitary grief now resonated with Sophia's laughter, Emma's gentle singing, and Rocky's protective presence. Emma balanced Sophia on her hip as she stirred a pot of stew on the stove. At 10 months old, Sophia was becoming more active daily, her curious hands reaching for everything within grasp. Rocky lay nearby, vigilant as always when Sophia was awake. "Your class runs late tonight, Emma?" asked as Thomas entered, his arms full of firewood. He nodded, stacking the logs beside the hearth. Environmental law Professor Richardson tends to go overtime at 65. Thomas had become Springvale Community College's oldest freshman, enrolling alongside Emma in courses that would help them establish a wildlife conservation area along on their section of Cedar Creek. "I'll get Sophia down before I go," Emma said, smoothing her daughter's wild curls. "Mrs. Cooper's coming over to watch her. She should be here any minute." The mention of Linda Cooper brought a smile to Thomas's face. The elderly woman, whose property had been central to Miller's schemes, had become a regular visitor to the cabin, finding in Sophia a surrogate great-grandchild, and in Thomas and Emma neighbors who shared her love of the land. A knock at the door announced her arrival. Linda Cooper entered with the energy of a woman, half her 78 years, arms laden with garden produce and fresh-baked cookies. "Beautiful evening," she declared, depositing her on the kitchen counter, perfect for studying. She winked at Emma, who had returned to college with a determination that impressed everyone who knew her circumstances. "Thanks again for watching, Sophia," Emma said, handing the baby to Linda's waiting arms. "Nonsense," Linda replied, bouncing Sophia gently. "This little one is a highlight of my week. Besides, Rocky does most of the work on cue." The German shepherd rose and moved to Linda's side, positioning himself protectively near Sophia. His formal training with Emma and Thomas had continued as required by the adoption agreement, but his natural bond with the baby transcended any professional obligation. As Thomas and Emma prepared to leave for their evening classes, Linda settled into the rocking chair with Sophia on her lap. "Oh, before I forget, Pastor Johnson asked me to remind you about the community meeting tomorrow. They're finalizing plans for the Cedar Creek Conservation Trust." Thomas nodded. "Will be there. The lawyer should have the paperwork ready by then." The Conservation Trust had emerged from the ashes of Miller's failed development, with his assets frozen and properties seized. The land along Cedar Creek had been temporarily held by the county through a coalition of neighbors, environmental advocates, and the newly elected town council. Plan had formed to preserve the entire creek system as protected land. Thomas's cabin and Emma's inherited property will become the trust cornerstone, with Linda Cooper's adjacent land, creating a substantial